USS Gerald R. caught fire. But what may be more alarming is not the fire itself. What is more alarming is what the United States may start thinking after that. Because while this aircraft carrier is undergoing repairs, the Strait of Hormuz remains at an unsafe point. And if the United States begins relying more on amphibious ships and the Marines, that means the direction of its operation is starting to move closer to Iran's coastline, to the islands guarding the strait, and to a war that would be far harder to control. So what should worry us is not just the damage to USS Ford, but the possibility that the United States is beginning to prepare a far more dangerous way to reopen Hormuz.
President Trump will ensure they are hit harder than they have ever been hit before.
Geo lovers, this discussion is not about deciding who looks tougher on the battlefield. What we really want to measure is something more decisive. After this war has unfolded, which military target is actually the most realistic, what cost would have to be paid, and why reopening the Strait of Hormuz is far more complicated than simply sending fighter jets or large warships. That matters because the situation has already moved beyond an ordinary threat. AP News reported that both Iran and the United States have hardened their positions, while Iran has also tightened its grip over Hormuz. So what needs to be examined now is not merely who is attacking whom, but what kind of operation truly makes sense if this route is to be reopened. The biggest problem in Hormuz is not only how destructive it could be for the global economy. The bigger problem is how to reopen this route without making the war spread even further. On paper, the United States has aircraft carriers, jets, missiles, and bases. But in reality, that does not automatically mean the shipping lane can be secured right away. Defense News wrote that reopening the Strait of Hormuz often looks like a simple move. But in practice, the operation is far more complex and dangerous, because what must be protected is not only warships, but also commercial vessels, mine countermeasure ships, and the entire narrow route lying close to Iran's coast and the island points that watch over the entrance to the strait. At the same time, USNI reported that the Tripoli ARG and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit are moving toward the Middle East. That signals that America's focus is no longer stopping in the open sea, but is beginning to shift toward capabilities that are more suitable for nearshore operations and narrow choke points. If there truly is no quick way, then every next move will be more expensive and more risky. And that risk is worth calculating because the burden passing through this strait is enormous. The IEA recorded that throughout 2025, nearly 20 million barrels of oil per day passed through Hormuz. The alternative routes that could be used to bypass the strait amount to only about 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day. So if the main route is disrupted, the world does not have a comparable substitute. That means the threat is not only war at sea, but also energy pressure that could spread to Asia, to prices, and to the global market. That is why the discussion about Tripoli, the Marines, islands, and mines becomes so important, because that is where the real operation will most likely be decided. Because reopening Hormuz has no quick path, even a small change in the composition of America's fleet immediately changes the calculation. That is what happened when USS Gerald R. was pulled to Suda Bay on March 23, 2026 for repairs after the fire on March 12th. The official version from the U.S. Navy sounded calm. They said Ford remained combat ready and that the cause of the fire was still under investigation. What was disclosed to the public was also very limited. The fire started in a laundry facility and was not linked to combat action. But the details that emerged made the official explanation feel overly restrained. More than 200 sailors were treated for smoke inhalation and returned to duty. One sailor was medically evacuated, more than 100 beds were damaged, and the Navy even had to send 1,000 mattresses from another ship to support recovery efforts. There were also reports that the response lasted for hours and that the impact spread into sleeping quarters and the crew's daily activities. So the public has reason to ask, if this was only a contained internal incident, why was the impact this large? Suspicion does not arise because there is proof that the United States is lying, but because the official version feels too brief for an incident of this scale. From here, one thing starts to become clear. Aircraft carriers still provide major striking power, but Hormuz cannot be dealt with through fighter aircraft and long-range strikes alone. The narrow route is still filled with the threat of mines, commercial ships still have to pass through, and points close to Iran's coastline still have to be watched. In that atmosphere, the movement of the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group together with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit toward the Middle East, followed by the Boxer ARG with the 11th MEU from California, feels like more than a routine rotation. This formation brings around 2,200 Marines from the Tripoli ARG/31st MEU and additional amphibious strength from Boxer ARG, complete with helicopters, Ospreys, landing troops, and the ability to move close to shore. This feels like a sign that defeating Hormuz cannot be done through aircraft carrier deployment alone. At this point, it makes sense that America's attention is beginning to shift toward amphibious ships. Just so you know, geo-lovers, if an aircraft carrier is like a floating air base, an amphibious ship is like a floating landing base because this kind of warship is designed to bring troops and combat equipment close to the coast, then put them ashore once the operation begins. Defeating Hormuz does not only require fighter aircraft. This route also demands movement close to shore, logistical support, and the ability to land troops or heavy equipment at narrow points. A ship like USS Tripoli has value in that area. As an America-class amphibious assault ship, Tripoli does resemble a small aircraft carrier. The first two ships of this class, including Tripoli, do not even have a well deck, so more of their space is used for air assets. A ship like this can carry a mix of F-35Bs, Ospreys, CH-53S, UH-1Ys, AH-1Zs, and MH-60Ss, with capacity for around 1,462 personnel plus an additional 150 reserve personnel. So if the United States needs close air cover, rapid movement, and strikes launched from the coastline, Tripoli is indeed well suited for that job. But Tripoli is not enough on its own. Operations in Hormuz also need weight. That is where a ship like USS Boxer comes in. As a Wasp-class amphibious ship, Boxer can carry around 1,687 troops plus 184 additional personnel, and most importantly, this type of ship has the capacity to carry 3 landing craft air cushion vessels or 2 conventional landing craft. These hovercraft-style landing vessels can carry loads of around 60 to 75 tons, including heavy vehicles such as M1 tanks, and move from ship to shore without depending on a port. So if Tripoli provides wings, Boxer provides legs. One secures movement from the air, the other brings people, vehicles, and logistics to the front line. That is why when the Tripoli ARG and 31st MEU move to the Middle East, and then the Boxer ARG and 11th MEU follow from California, the formation feels like more than just extra ships. One Marine Expeditionary Unit usually consists of around 2,200 Marines and sailors built for rapid response from the sea and specifically designed for amphibious operations, securing narrow points, evacuation, or limited strikes. In a Hormuz scenario, a combination like this gives the United States something a pure aircraft carrier does not: the ability to apply pressure from the air, move close to shore, and still sustain the operation if the crisis drags on. This is where the shift starts to become visible. Not because the United States has definitely chosen a large-scale invasion, but because the options being prepared are increasingly suited for a war moving from the open sea toward Iran's shoreline. An amphibious formation may look suitable on paper, but once it gets close to Hormuz, the calculation changes immediately. The strait is only around 50 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Western ships entering that route would be within range of missiles, cheap drones, and even artillery from Iran. Iran also controls the northern coastline of the Persian Gulf and much of the coast around the mouth of the strait. So every ship entering that area is not moving through safe waters, but in front of a firing line already prepared by the other side. And the pressure does not come from just one type of threat. Analysis cited by Defense News says Iran has more than 1,000 fast attack craft, more than 2,000 naval mines, land-based anti-ship missiles, and swarms of drones that can pressure the point defenses of warships. On top of that, between March 1st and March 16th, 2026, the International Maritime Organization also recorded 17 incidents involving merchant ships in Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, with ships damaged and at least 11 sailors killed or missing. That is why operations here cannot be imagined as an ordinary convoy. Even large warships would have to move through an area that is narrow, dense with threats, and extremely close to enemy positions. Then there are three names often overlooked in broader discussions: Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb. CSIS wrote that these three islands control the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. That means as long as those points remain active as eyes, ears, or launch sites, merchant ships and mine countermeasure vessels will continue operating under the shadow of attack. This is where the war scenario starts to escalate. Because once the operation moves toward these islands, the United States is no longer just protecting shipping lanes. It is beginning to approach an operation aimed at suppressing the key points Iran holds at the entrance to the strait. Mines make everything slower. The U.S. Navy itself has just deactivated its Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships in Bahrain and replaced them with literal combat ships carrying mine warfare packages. That shows one thing: the mine threat is still considered real, and opening a safe route still requires time, protection, and specialized tools. So the closer this operation moves toward Iran's islands and coastline, the higher the price that must be paid. So if this war truly moves into its next stage, what step is the most realistic for the United States to choose without making the whole region explode even further? If all those calculations are combined, the most sensible step for the United States is not a large-scale ground war against Iran. What is more realistic is a limited operation to reopen the shipping corridor. The sequence is also fairly clear. First, suppress Iran's missile launchers and drones around the entrance route to the strait. Protect mine countermeasure ships and commercial vessels that want to pass through. After that, prepare pressure on the points watching the entrance to Hormuz if the threat remains active. An option like this makes more sense because the United States is still trying to build international support. AP News reported that Trump even asked around 7 countries highly dependent on Middle Eastern oil to join a Hormuz security coalition. That shows one thing: America knows the burden of this operation is too great to carry alone, while a full invasion scenario would also be much harder to sell to allies and to its own public. That direction also matches the force structure already moving into the region. At the same time, the Pentagon itself has not yet explained when and how tanker escorts would be carried out. And that gap is exactly why a limited amphibious scenario feels the most logical. Aircraft carriers would still be used for pressure from afar, but the most decisive work would happen below that level, clearing mines, keeping ships moving, and if necessary, pressuring the narrow points that allow the entire strait to be choked. And if the world's energy route begins to be reopened through pressure on Iran's islands and coastline, then what we may be witnessing is not the end of this crisis, but the beginning of a far more frightening phase of war.